Hello everyone, today we come to the next horror stories, let's start. Story 1, Morning. This story was told to me by my brother-in-law. It's a bit long but I promise you, it is pretty scary. I don't know the names of the two people in this story so we'll name them as we go along. This story took place in Thailand about 6-7 years ago. My BL had relatives who lived in Thailand. A not too old loving couple got into a horrible accident and that's when the nightmares began. We'll name the husband, Meng, and the wife, Pai. One unfortunate day while going to the garden/work, Meng and Pai got into a horrible car accident. The car had flipped off the road sending Pai and Meng flying down a rock/stone-filled hill. Meng died at the scene while Pai was taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Unfortunately, Pai fell into a coma due to her injuries. While in her coma, the family and relatives had already taken care of and finished the funeral services for Meng. A few months had passed and fortunately, Pai had finally woken up from her coma. The family decided it was best not to tell her about her husband since she had just woken up and still needed to recover, so they lied to her telling her that her husband is well and at home waiting for her. After being well enough to be released from the hospital, Pai had finally made it home only to find her husband was nowhere to be found. The family finally told her truth. Sadly, Pai did not take the news very well. She cried and cried her eyes out. She'd visit the grave and mourn her feelings out there. Morning, day, and night, all she would do is sit by the door bed and mourn for her dead husband, but everything took a sharp turn very soon after. One day while sitting by the door mourning for her dead husband, she noticed something shaking the tall grass near the house. In Thailand, there are many tall grass, trees, etc. from the woods or grass plains in the mountains and their house is on the edge of town where there are lots of tall grass and next to the woods. It caught her attention since an odd figure started to form its way out of the tall grass. The more she focused on it the more it started to resemble a human-like creature. Pai stopped mourning now and all her attention was on this thing near the grass. As she paid more close attention to it, she finally noticed what she had been staring at was a human on all fours, dark rotten face, staring right back at her. Pai froze in fear, no one was home since everyone left to the garden. This person thing started to make its way out of the grass and towards where she was sitting. She could now make out the face, it was her dead husband. Pai could not move a muscle nor could she let out a single cry. Her dead husband started to crawl on all fours towards her. He slowly opens his mouth with blood dripping down the rotten tongue sticking out. He moans out, Koj Nyam, Koj Kwaj Rao Kuv Rav Kab Los Tos Koj Os. Koj Nyam Los Nrog Kuv Muse Os. Dear wife, you keep crying for me so I have come back to take you with me. Dear wife, come with me. The dead husband finally crawled his way over to her, laid one hand on her arm, and began to drag Pai with him. Pai, now able to muster what little strength she could, finally let out a scream at the top of her lungs. Neighbors rushed to her aid and that thing was now gone. A few days passed since that incident. Pai no longer mourns for her dead husband, but instead fears him. For a few days she could not talk or explain what had happened. Everyone thought she had gone crazy since losing her husband. The Ua Nij, Jingle Bells shaman ritual, for Pai, but it did not help at all. It just got worse from here on. Pai could not sleep alone or be left alone during any time of the day. As long as she closes her eyes, she could then smell the rotten stench and hear the dead husband's breathing right next to her. Every single night Pai would hear scratching noises outside of her bed and hear a voice calling out, Koj Nyam. Koj Nyam a los. Dear wife, come. One day Pai was able to fall asleep due to countless days and nights of being sleep deprived. The family thought it was okay now since she was able to sleep and they decided to leave her alone in her room. Within minutes of falling asleep, Pai felt something pinch her arm so hard that it bled. She immediately woke up in fear and pain. When examining her, her arms and legs were pinched multiple times, her face had been licked with blood. It got so serious to the point where they had to call Pi's sister, we'll call her Mai, home from school to stay with her since she is a Christian. They thought that might help. Mai does not believe in ghosts except for one's own demons, but that soon changed. The first 2 nights were okay. They both were able to sleep just fine until the 3rd night. This particular night started off just like any other night. As Pi and Mai were about to fall asleep, Mai had just noticed how quiet it suddenly got outside and the air around them changed. There was a slight foul stench and the air grew colder above them. They both heard noises right on top of the roof above their bedroom but thought nothing of it, thinking it might be small night critters. A good hour or 2 went by and Pi was woken up to some fluid dripping onto her face. As she wiped her face she noticed it was not water nor was it saliva. It had the smell of blood. Shocked and terrified, she turned on a small lamp/flashlight and immediately regretted doing so. Pi, now frozen in fear and unable to move, could only watch as her dead husband was staring right down at her from the top of the ceiling with a bloody grin on his face. The air grew colder and the foul stench grew stronger and thicker. The dead husband, now slowly crawling his way from the ceiling, still wearing that horrible bloody grin, now to the wall, and onto the floor right in front of Pi, about to grab her hand, moaned out, "Koj Nyam Rog Kuv Muse Os. Dear wife, come with me." What seemed like an eternity ended in an instant when Mai screamed at the top of her lungs, alerting everyone in the house. Mai had witnessed the whole thing. While still a Christian, Mai still agreed to need to change her and Pi's name. Pi now converted to Christianity. It made her feel better and safer that way. Since the name change, she has now been living in peace. At least that's what I've been told since then. I don't know how she is as of today. There were more encounters with the dead husband, but it's too long. I don't want to bore you all. Story 2. It had been 2 years since I had left Nepal and traveled to Europe to pursue my higher education, finally settling down in London. Due to a series of unfortunate events, I became addicted to cannabis and other drugs. Well, I have to admit that time was both fun and had some dark moments. Nonetheless, I decided to quit everything and go back to Kathmandu, my hometown in Nepal. I was slowly recovering from my addiction, and after so long, I had my family and friends, who kept cheering me and strongly supported me. My father then suggested me to go and live in our farmhouse for one particular weekend, which was in the outskirts of the city. I will tell you the description of the house. The house stood between the highway and a farm that my dad owned. It faced the highway. It was a traditionally made, 2 stories, wooden house with steel tin as the roof. The ground floor had a hall, kitchen, and bathroom, while the top floor had 3 small rooms. A family from a nearby village used to take care of the house and the farm. The nearest market from this place was around 10 miles far, and our nearest neighbor lived at least a mile further than the house. I took up my dad's advice and invited 4 of my friends and their 3 girlfriends. This was not the first time I was going to stay in that house. My sister and I have spent dozens of our short and long vacations here in the past. One particular Friday afternoon of 2011, 8 of us packed our bags and traveled to that place. When we reached, our caretaker welcomed us warmly and helped us settle down. After the dinner and a small drinking session, I didn't drink whatsoever. The couples decided to go for a walk. My single friend and I stayed back as they wanted some privacy. The ladies were given 1 room, and we, gentlemen, shared the other 2 rooms. The caretaker slept in the hall, ground floor. We chatted for some time and then went to sleep. My other friend went to the other room, as he had kept his stuff there. I didn't got any sleep and turned on my iPod. I listened a couple of songs, and when I chose to play Hallowed Be Thy Name by Iron Maiden, something strange happened. The song started, but it skipped some riffs and verses. At first, I thought either the iPod had hung or I forwarded by mistake and replayed the song, but again the same thing happened. The song stopped in between and a shallow, growling voice started to play. I switched the iPod off that very moment and started to wonder. Then when my eyes went out of the window toward the farm, I saw a naked kid aged around 10-12 standing about 200 meters from home and staring directly at my eyes and disappeared. I couldn't take it anymore and gave a loud cry. My friend and our caretaker came running to my room and calmed me down. As I was relating this incident to them, one couple came back from walk listened what I narrated. Shortly after, everyone came back, and we all slept together in the hall. Next morning, I hiked to that particular point while cleaning my teeth. I noticed something was buried there. I rushed back to my caretaker, and he explained to me that some local villagers secretly bury their dead ones in the farm. He also told me that my father knew about it, but he was not taking any actions against it. The caretaker further told me that he has also experienced something unusual in the past, and that's the reason he never sleeps in that house unless someone from our family came there to stay. He came in the morning, finished his work, and went back to his house in the village. We returned back the very day and told my dad about it. He didn't believe it at first, but later started to believe, and he sold the entire property to some builders. I actually want to know the connection between my iPod and the sight I saw. Story 3. My little cousin, age 14, blows keys for the funeral and always stays late past midnight until he is done playing his part. Then he would get to come home. He didn't know how to drive, so my auntie and uncle would always pick him up when he called them. This one night when my little cousin was at the funeral, my auntie and uncle got a call from him saying he was done and to come pick him up. He didn't have his own phone, so he usually had to borrow someone's to call them. When they got there, my auntie and uncle decided to stay for a bit at the funeral and find my little cousin. Then they would all go together to the car. They stayed there for a good 10 minutes by the cooking/food area and didn't see my little cousin throughout the 10 minutes. Then right when they decided to get up and was about to go look for him to go home, there he was coming right at them saying, "Let's go home." As they got outside to the car, my little cousin got inside and shut the door. They had a big Odyssey van also. The ride home was more quiet because when they asked him about how the funeral was, they got no response, so they thought my little cousin was too tired and just fell asleep all the way in the back seat or something. When then they got home, they said, "Late Sogtsev os, Psalm. Lay, we have arrived home. Wake up." Lay, short for Alex, he's the last boy also, so he was very loved and spoiled. When they told him to wake up because they were home, they already heard movement like someone getting up from the back seat, and when they opened the door for him, he didn't come out. My uncle peeked inside, and he was nowhere to be found in the back seat. My auntie thought he was mad, so he hid back in the trunk area. My auntie opened the back, and he wasn't there either. They looked everywhere around the car and looked by the house door to see if he had already walked to the door. My auntie and uncle got freaked out and thought he was mad for waiting too long, so he probably ran somewhere to go hide. They had no more idea where he could have been because they looked everywhere already and still they were nowhere to be found. After a good 20 minutes of looking, they had finally decided that they were going to call the cops. Right before they could even call the cops, they got a phone call from my little cousin saying he was ready for them to go pick him up. When they got that call, their hearts dropped. They both were shocked and said it felt just like déjà vu. By that time, my auntie and uncle's heart already a little scared. They wondered who was the one that got in the car with them and called them. When they got back to the funeral, my little cousin was already outside waiting for them. He got in and complained of how tired he was and kept on talking and talking. My uncle and aunt asked if he had called a while ago, and he said, no, he just got done and just called them now. The question's us, are we alone sometimes? And is it really who we see when we see someone? Story 4. My parents always told us to not pick up stuff on the streets because you don't know who it belongs to. If your parents ever told you anything like this, I'd advise you to listen, youngins. I lost my mom in 7th grade due to cervical cancer. She battled it for 3 years before it took a toll on her body. Well, when I was in 6th grade, my older brother and I had just transferred to a new school together. Our bus stop was about 4 blocks away from the house. That morning as we were on our way to the bus stop, there was a trail of pennies. Yes, you read that right. A trail of pennies. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. My older brother had this great idea that we should pick it up and bring it home to our parents. They kept a change jar. I didn't think twice. I picked up the whole trail of pennies. Every last one. I kept it in my pockets the entire school day and brought it straight home to my mom as my dad was already at work. She was sick, but she smiled and told me to put it in the change jar in their closet. Since then, she kept telling us about the person she saw in the closet. How he had such long hairy hands. How he would sometimes try to reach out and touch her. Or sometimes he'd stand there and just stare at her, but he was there. She would always see him in there. I know it's not the cause of my mother's death, but sometimes I cannot help but to feel guilty that my younger, idiot self did that. She passed a year later and everyone tells me it's not my fault and that she's always been sick, but I can't help but to blame myself a little. If your parents ever told you not to do something, don't do it. Story 5, The Thank You. Recommendation: listen to Ma View's song Niam Tussen Ziagen Stig before/during reading this. This is a very long story. Please bear with me. On November 1st, 2016, at approximately 3:34 p.m., it was a beautiful, sunny, and dry afternoon when I had just gotten off of work. On my way home, I received a call from my brother. I never would have thought this call would bring such an impact to my life. I need you to come to Mom's house. Mom passed away. I immediately froze. I felt as though my heart had literally stopped. My breathing too felt as though it had stopped. My vision became blurry. My mind began clouded. I felt numb. I had probably driven through a red light without even realizing it. The phone slipped through my hands. I was in disbelief and denial. My mother's home was only a couple miles down the road, so I got there shortly after the call. I opened the door and saw everyone sitting and standing around, some grieving and some calling relatives to pass the news. It felt as if everything was mute. I stood by the door still with disbelief, in a state of shock. I stood like a statue, still trying to pick up all the pieces until a figure in the blur of my vision came closer to me and touched my shoulder. Its touch somehow instantly brought me back to reality. Grieving and talking over another became louder. My vision became clearer. It was as if someone had turned up the volume. I wished so badly that it was just a dream. A couple days later, the money folding began. We had relatives and friends over, some to show support and some to assist. We were planning on how we were going to make ends meet with the funeral and who was taking what role. I volunteered to do a brief slideshow of my mother because I had access to files of old memories of my mother. I also never would have thought that the moment I opened the video editor program that it would be one of the hardest challenges I would face. I had chosen Ma View's song, Niam Tussen Ziagen Stig, as the background music, and every time I would review the video, the song would play, and it would always touch me with such agony. Every photo. Every video. It reminded me not only of the past, but also of what I had just lost. Every single night, I had spent hours after hours, and every single time I opened up the program, tears would roll down my face. In the brief video, it consisted of slideshow photos and videos. It didn't just focus on her. It focused on memories of our family, the places we visited, the excitements, the laughters, and the gatherings. I intended to present not only of who guests, relatives, and friends were intending to pay their respects and condolences to, but also to see the strength and love our family has for one another. It had been a couple days after the burial. The sound of the keege, among instrument, and drums still lingered in my head. I heard it when I thought and slept. I was restless and exhausted. I was not able to get a full sleep, nor was I able to eat a full meal. I became ill. It was after the third night I encountered the dream. At the time, we lived in a duplex which consisted of 3 rooms and 2 bathrooms. We had modified the basement and made available a 4th room. In the basement was my bed, a family sofa, and a 60 TV. I sometimes sleep on the sofa on accident while watching TV. The night I had the dream, I was asleep on my bed. Now, the start of my dream. In my dream, I had woken up to a strong presence. I felt uneasy. I was still ill. I had gotten up out of bed in pitch dark. I was going to go take some medicine. Keep in mind, I was still in my dream without realizing it. I walked up the stairs and opened the door leading to my kitchen. That was the moment I immediately became aware that I had not woken up yet. I'm normally a lucid dreamer. Sometimes I get confused with reality and my dream, but I've gotten better with realizing whether I'm awake or not. The kitchen floor was filled with smoke or some sort of mist. You would understand this image if you've seen Insidious. It was as if I had entered the further. In my kitchen, I had a digital stove which also told the time. Being used to lucid dreaming, I was afraid, however, calm and aware. I looked at the time, and it indicated 7:06 p.m. 7:06 p.m. during winter, late November, in Wisconsin is dark out. I could see the dark sky through my glass doors leading to the patio outside. However, I was not able to make clear of what I was seeing that was behind my wood patio due to the mist, but enough to know it was still dark. It was when I stepped a foot further into the kitchen I heard the Ma View's song. The very first line, Nyam. Tab Pw Li Ko. It echoed as if I was standing in the middle of an auditorium. At that moment, I raced downstairs in fear. Usually I'm very good at waking myself up to reality, but this time it was different. I felt as if I was trapped or someone was preventing me from succeeding. After many attempts to wake myself up, I was going to physically wake my real-world body up. At that point, I was willing to imagine everything possible. I was desperate and in great fear. I ran to my bedroom but was not successful in finding my body. I searched the entire basement and was not able to find myself anywhere. All of a sudden, my world blinked, and I woke up sleeping on my basement sofa. I was not awake in reality but again in my dream. I was awake in my dream, however, I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and attempting my best to move, but it was not successful. Seconds during sleep paralysis, I realized I had my phone on my right hand. I was stuck sleeping on my left side where my right arm went over my left arm as it stuck out. I thought to myself that if I'm not able to physically move my body, at least I could move my fingers. With my thumb, I pressed the home button of my iPhone 7s, and it lit up a short distance from where I was sleeping. However, the light was low. Image turning on your phone at the lock screen in the dark. Experiencing sleep paralysis, I was not able to move my head to see what was above or around me, only a locked view of my left hand. I could see something very still in front of me. It looked like some black cloth fabric. My left arm that stuck out, and with only being able to move my fingers, I began to try and grab at the black cloth in hopes I would be able to pull myself off the couch. It was the moment when I touched the black cloth and immediately became aware that it was actually someone standing in front of me when that thing that I touched suddenly took a step back. I freaked out terribly, probably causing me to breathe rapidly in the real world. Suddenly, remember I'm not able to move my head, so my view was limited. At the very corner of my right eye, I saw blackish, messy hair slowly come down. I had never wanted to close my eyes so badly in my life, however, I felt as though something/someone was preventing me from doing so. For those who have seen foreign horror Thai, Chinese, and Japanese films, you could probably visualize/imagine what I was seeing. The hair slowly came down all the way up to the eyebrows and had stopped. The skin tone was thin, and the skin color was a greenish blue, like it already had rotten. At that very moment, I was able to articulate that it was my mother. Seconds felt like minutes at that point. All of a sudden, a loud cry, a cultural/traditional crying for the dead, right at my right ear. What I pictured in my head while all of this was happening was my mother standing upside down from the ceiling up to my face and then letting out that cry right at my right ear. The moment I heard that cry, I instantly woke up to actual reality. I sat right up in cold sweat, breathing rapidly. I was so paranoid I didn't even realize I had really woken up to reality. It was around 5:00 a.m. at that point. Shortly afterwards, it all felt real again. I realized that I had successfully woken up to reality. The entire dream still played in my head. I did not go back to sleep afterwards because I was afraid I'd get trapped again in my nightmare. The next day I thought back to that dream, still being able to play the entire dream as if I was still there. Till this day, I still don't know the real reason behind that dream, but I had gathered questions to myself. Maybe she had something to say. Maybe she didn't want me to wake up, which explains no matter how much effort I was not able to successfully wake myself up, and waking up the second time to the same dream. Maybe the reason she didn't show her whole face was because she thought I'd be scared and had only shown enough to make realize it was her. Maybe she was sad and wanted to see me one last time. Maybe she wanted to thank me. Story 6, Pojn Sug. This is a story back in Laos that one of the OGs told me. This is a true story. If it was fake then I wouldn't share, so please be respectful. I decided to share it with you guys because I thought it's scary. Hope you guys like it. Inoi. There was this young boy around 10-12 years old. His mom went to the farm, and his dad was outside the house. They lived not far away from the cemetery. The boy was sick and was laying on the bed. He was laying down and resting, then he heard some voice like kids were talking behind their house. He peeked out the wall. In Laos, Hmong houses are made out of bamboo and woods. He peeked out and saw two kids talking and giggling. What the boy heard from the two kids is, "Hey, let's go and bother the kid inside the house." The boy looked at the two kids' face, and it looked so similar to a cat face. The face was kind of hairy, eyes shaped like a cat's eye, nose same thing as a cat, the ear was shaped, and the mouth looked like a cat mouth as well, but it was big. The boy inside the house knew what it was a Pojn Sug. Ob Tug Pojn Sug came up to the door and looked at the kid as he was laying on the bed staring back at the Pojn Sug. The Pojn Sug asked the kid, "Hey kid, come out here. Let's go play." The kid knew what they were, so he refused to go. The Pojn Sug said, "Hurry, let's go play." There were two Pojn Sugs, so one Pojn Sug said, "His parents are not home. Let's just go inside and sit on him until he's flat and dead." The two Pojn Sugs stepped inside the house. The kid got really scared and yelled out to his father. Their house had two doors, one from the front of the house and one from the back of the house. His dad was doing something outside the front door, but he didn't see the Pojn Sug, so when the boy yelled, the father got inside and said, "Oh, Pojn Sug." He went outside and got some peach leaves and goat's legs. The father said, "Sav tom no kuv ua com nws tuag kayag muse." The Pojn Sugs got scared and ran outside to the cemetery. The father chased the Pojn Sugs all the way, and saw the Pojn Sug went to hide behind the cemetery. The father went and looked, but the Poj and Sugs were gone. Story 7, Case of the Ex. Yesterday I saw my ex. She died in a car accident 16 years ago. She was pregnant with our child. It's crazy. I've been happily married for almost 5 years now, but you never really get over something like that, you know? Let's get back to yesterday. I just bought a new grill and was seasoning it. My wife went over to the market to grab some more food for the cookout we're having this weekend. I was in the backyard, but the door was open because I was watching television while prepping the grill. All of a sudden, I heard a crash from inside the house. I walked in, and a few of our glass cups had fallen off the kitchen counter. There was glass everywhere. I thought that maybe my wife may have left them too close to the edge, and I had the television on too loud. It made sense. While I was cleaning up the glass, the TV turned off. Honestly, it's pretty normal. It goes to sleep after so much inactivity. What was not normal was that I just walked into the house, so there was no inactivity, but it's electronic and quirky things happen once in a while. I finished cleaning up the glass and walked over to turn the TV back on. That was when the doorbell rang. I figured that it was my wife, and she probably needed help with the groceries, so I ran over. I must have missed some glass because I cut my foot running to the front door. I was annoyed, so I stopped and sat on a dining chair to inspect my foot. The doorbell rang a few more times, but I didn't care. She has keys, and I was bleeding everywhere. The ringing eventually stopped, but she never came in, so I got a little annoyed. This woman really expected me to open the door for her when she had keys. I gave in and limped over to the door. When I opened it, no one was there. Her car wasn't even in the driveway. It must have been someone else, I thought to myself. I closed the door and headed back to the dining room. When I got there, every hair on my body stood up. My ex was sitting at the table. She looked exactly the way she did all those years ago. She was still pregnant. I was sad but frightened at the same time. "You moved," she said to me. I was frozen. I couldn't say anything. I was afraid to say anything. "I came through the back door because you didn't open the front door." "It was open." "Why'd you move?" she questioned again. The only thing I could mutter was, "Sorry." The front door opened, and my wife yelled for me to help her unload the car. I turned over and saw my wife looking over to me. That's when my ex screamed, and the front and back doors both slammed shut. When I turned to look at my ex, she was gone. I ran over to the front door and opened it again. My wife was freaking out because she couldn't understand what had just happened. Heck, I still don't understand what happened, and I'm afraid it's going to keep happening now. I have no idea what to do. Story 8. These two ghost stories are my father's. During 1972, when my father was 11 years old, there was a man from his village who went to the front line to fight the Red Lao and the Vietnamese communist. He got killed in action and was brought back to the village. His funeral took at least 6 days. The man's body was badly decomposed. After the funeral, the man's family carried him to his final resting spot and buried him. He was buried close to the path that my father and his family takes to go to their chicken farm. The man was buried about a 2 to 3 minute walk from the path. His grave isn't visible since there are tall grasses and bushes hiding it. My father's family chicken farm is about 15 minutes away on foot, where the man's grave is. Around 4 p.m. that day, my father, my aunt, my uncle, and their cousin went to the chicken farm to close up the chickens for the day. After closing up the chickens around 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., they began to walk home. There was also a Hmong family from their village who had a farm close by. As they were walking by, they saw that some of the family members were also closing up their chickens for the day. The sun has set and it's hard to see people without a flashlight. As they walked past the other farm, in front of them from a distance my father saw a figure of a man standing on top of the hill on the same path they were walking on. In my father's heart he knew that it was the man who passed away at war and was just buried. My father then told my aunt, uncle, and their cousin that they should go back to the other Hmong family, and stay with them and go back to the village together. My father told them that there's a ghost walking up ahead on top of the hill, and it's probably the ghost of the man who was just buried. My aunt, uncle, and their cousins didn't listen to my father and said that they can just pick up some rocks. If the ghost of the man attacks them they will just throw rocks at him. My father didn't want to go so he stayed back to look from the distance. As my aunt, uncle, and their cousin made it close to the hill where the man's ghost was, the man launched at them. Scared they all came back screaming and crying. My father lectured them for not listening to him. They then walked back and stayed with the other Hmong family and waited for them. Soon after, they walked back to the village with the other Hmong family. When they got to the same spot the ghost of the man was standing, he was no longer there. After that incident my father never saw the ghost of the man ever again. Year 1975, towards the end of the Vietnam War. My father went to the chicken farm with his grandma to move the chickens to the mountain where they have another farm where they plant corns and raise pigs. That night everyone who had farmed close by all went home. My father and his grandma were alone at the farm looking after the chickens. That night the chickens were making noises from outside. My father and his grandma woke up to check on the chickens. As they got outside and looked, there was nothing. The chickens were okay and there was nothing out of the ordinary. My father and his grandma then went back to sleep. The second night around 10 p.m. the chickens were making noises again. My father's grandma got up, went out to check, and saw a small figure by the chicken coop. The small figure was a few distance away and with her bad eyesight, she couldn't really tell what the figure was. My father got up and stuck his head out the door to look. He rubs his eyes and when he looked, he saw a pog and sug. My father then told his grandma that it's a pog and sug. At that moment the pog and sug tried grabbing one of their chickens. My father's grandma then picked up a small log and threw the log at the pog and sug. It screamed as it got hit, and disappeared into the night. My father and his grandma got scared so they left back to their village the next morning. 2 days after, my grandpa and my uncle went back to the farm and found all their chickens dead. It seemed that the chickens were bitten and sat on to death by the pog and sug. Story 9. Something freaky happened to me at my previous workplace a few years ago. At the time I was working at a small non-profit. I was in charge of a small women's group at night, from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Even though my work building is located in the bad part of town, but that didn't really bother me. Until winter was approaching and night time came early. Because of this, I made my boyfriend come stay with me for my group meeting. He stayed in the office hidden away from us and waited for me. When I completed my group and all the women left, my boyfriend came out of the office and told me he was going outside to smoke. When he was done, he rang the doorbell for me to come open the door for him. A few minutes later, I heard the doorbell and opened the door for him. He was mad at me. He said he had rang the doorbell a couple of times and looked through the glass door. He saw me walking away from him. He said I was wearing a white sweater, and that I walked into the back room of the office. He became confused and asked how come I walked out of another room, and how come I was wearing a black sweater instead. I didn't say anything. I quickly went and grabbed my coat and purse, shut the lights, set the alarm and we both left. He asked why I was in such a hurry, and why did I leave that lady in there. I replied that all the women had left, and he must have seen a ghost. The only co-worker I trusted at the time was another Hmong girl that worked with me. The next day, I told her what had happened. She has some psychic abilities. She told me something I had forgotten about. She said that the lady that my boyfriend saw was my boss's friend who had passed away a few weeks ago. She said that the deceased friend's husband had donated a few of her belongings to our workplace, and my boss had put them in the back room. She had a feeling that the lady was worried about her belongings and just went to check up on them. I freaked out. That's why people should not buy stuff at thrift stores. Spirits become attached to their belongings. Suffice to say, I quit doing the evening women's group after this LOL. Story 10. When I was a freshman in high school, I would always stay up late and talk on the phone with my friends until 2 or 3 in the morning, and sometimes end up falling asleep while on the phone or talked until the phone died. Before this, I had very few encounters with getting sat on. But this is the one encounter that totally messed me up for months to the point where I didn't want to sleep anymore. I used to share a room with my younger stepsister, but on the weekends she stayed at her dad's house. One night while my sister was at her dad's, I was up talking on the phone with one of my friends and we talked until almost 3 a.m. Side note, I had a little radio by the side of my bed that I used as an alarm clock for school, but always unplugged on the weekends, because it was loud and annoying. So around 3 we said good night and I fell asleep as soon as we hung up. I used to sleep on my side and I'm an extremely light sleeper, so even the slightest sound would wake me up. While I was asleep, I heard some Taylor Swift music playing very quietly. I thought, maybe I might have forgotten to unplug the radio on before I fell asleep. I slowly opened my eyes to check if it was plugged in, only to realize the light from the radio was off. The music was still playing, so I thought maybe it was coming from my brother's room next door. I was immediately freaked out. I was going to run to my door to turn on my lights, Booty couldn't move at all. I was freaking out and my heart was racing. The music started to play louder like it was right in my ear. Since I was lying on my side, I had my opposite arms under the pillow. I had a little gap between my arm and the pillow. I closed my eyes super tight and was too afraid to open them, because I figured if I just went back to sleep it would be fine. For some reason maybe only a minute passed by and I opened my eyes again. In that moment, I couldn't close them anymore, and I felt something touching my arm. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness in my room, so I could see only what was in front of me. With little lights that was coming from the curtains at my window, I was trying to see what was touching my arm. I could kind of make out what was happening. A black figure's head was slowly rising up from under my arm, until it was almost face to face with me. I was freaking out. I wanted to cry, because I couldn't move, and I was so scared. I tried so hard to break out of it, but it was pointless. Then for a moment, I stopped struggling and remembered my grandma and grandpa telling me to spit at whatever was bothering me whenever I got sat on. So I tried to spit at it, told it to go away, and all of a sudden I was able to move again. I got up faster than I ever have before and ran to my light to turn it on. I opened my door, then ran to the living room to find my brother still up playing games. I asked if they played any Taylor Swift music, and they said no. Why? I didn't tell them what happened because I was afraid to talk about it. I ended up staying up until 8 a.m., and could not get that image of the black figure's head slowly rising out of my head. I told my parents about it the next day, but as always, they just said it was a bad dream. Till this day, 3 a.m. always freaks me out. If I'm asleep by 2:50 a.m., then I'll be fine, but if it's past 3 a.m. and I'm still awake, I will try to stay awake until the morning. Story 11, The Scratch. So this was my personal experience that happened to me. Right now, I'm 14 years old, and these things have happened to me ever since I was 11. They continued to happen over these past years, but only once in a while. This is the first experience. When I was 11, I was dating this young dude, but we had some problems and broke up. At that time, I was extremely depressed that it was all my fault. That's why I lost him. I always asked myself, when was I going to find someone who loved me and accepted me? Since it was my first breakup, I was always down and dingo things less cheerfully than I usually do. Whenever I sing a song, it was always a sad song, and I would cry along. My mother considered this as sieve. One night, I dreamed of me standing next to my ex. Then there was this other guy who came and said to me, "Come. If he doesn't love you, then come with me, and I'll love you." He then grabbed me by my left hand and took me away, but as we walked away from my ex, I woke up. That day when I was in school, I didn't remember doing anything to scratch myself. But at the end of the day when I was playing with my pencil, I looked at my left arm thinking about the dream. There were 3 scratches, and it didn't look normal. The scratches looked like it was peeled off. Usually, when I get scratched, my skin would turn white then red, and it would swell after a while. I used my pencil and scratched myself, but it left a red scratch mark. Then I went to my locker and scratched myself with it, but it turned white then swelled. I thought this was strange but didn't seem to care. When I got home, I showed my mom the 3 scratches, and it was more noticeable than before. In Hmong she said, "Why is it like this?" I replied, "Ick." I was playing with my pencil and saw it. She asked me if I scratched myself, and I replied no. I even told her that I used my pencil and locker to scratch myself and see if it matched the scratch, but no. My mom had this worried yet confused look on her face, but I was careless and walked away. That night she was on the phone with my auntie and was talking about what happened earlier. My aunt said her brother was a shaman, so she'd contact him and ask him to see what was up. She gave her brother our phone number so he could contact us about the information. When he called he said that I rog dab cho chwagid how to write that in English, nor am I sure it's correct in Hmong. My apologies. He said he had hidden my spirit for an amount of time, so we needed to do Jingle Bell for me ASAP. My mother then started having these dreams of random people coming up asking about my name and dreams that guys are coming to marry me. My mom always woke up with fear next to me, because I shared a bed with her. She cut peach branches and made an X on all of the doors and windows. She also made me the white and red necklace, but it was thicker and tied it around my neck. Couple of days later, I was on the computer and felt my necklace sliding off my neck as if it had broke. As I quickly yanked it, it caught on the back of my neck. I ignored the strange feeling and left my necklace alone. Minutes later, the same feeling occurred, but as before I yanked it, and it was stuck. When my mother came back from asking a shaman to do the ritual, I told her to take off my necklace because it kept bothering me and felt like it was falling off. My mom shook me and said some people want to break your necklace. And I was like, who? She just said, "Shoo, don't even ask." Then she cut off the necklace the following week and tied it under the kitchen table. She said it keeps me from going anywhere. About 2 months after those unusual experiences, we did the ritual. Everything was back to normal. My mother also wouldn't let me sing nor cry for those months. She had treated me just like a princess, with that soft assuring voice, and even brought the food to me. Sorry that this was a long story. I'm sorry if you guys weren't entertained, but I just wanted to share my haunting experience. Story 12. This is a story that happened to my uncle a while back. They were doing Ua Neeb for my uncle, because he has a lot of things that will go on top of him when he is sleeping. He also talks to people in his sleep, saying things like, Ua li os kuv mam rog nes muse os. Okay. I will go with you guys. My uncle has a son named Tony and he is also a shaman, but he just started so he can't really control what he sees and how he reacts to seeing spirits. In the middle of doing the Ua Neeg, we had the front door wide open and Tony went out for a smoke. He dropped his lighter and went down to grab it. He then saw a lady standing in front of him. No one else saw her but him and the shaman that was still doing Ua Neeb. At first he thought it was just another cousin coming to help, but then she yelled at him saying, "Why are you guys blocking our way? We are going to take him no matter what." Tony sensed something was wrong and he knew she wasn't human. Tony started to yell. He said, "You are not human and you are not welcomed." But she started to laugh at him, so he got angry. The man who was still doing Ua Neeg at the time, threw his Zayab Neeb out the door and it hit her in the head and the Zayab Neeb broke in half. She left. Then when it got dark and we were in the garage cutting up the pig, we heard a cat meowing outside. Everyone went out to see, and this wasn't any ordinary cat, it was a really big white cat with black and orange spots. It was not scared of us, it kept coming and rubbing itself on people's legs. We knew that it had to be the girl from before, so we just left it and closed the garage. Everyone left and the next morning the cat was still there. We had the shaman come back and he threw some red corn at it and the cat ran off. Thanks for taking your time to read this. Any thoughts? Story 13. First of all, I want to describe the surroundings of which this story took place so it'll be easier to understand. I live in this apartment complex, where the apartments surrounds both sides of the spacing ground/parking lot. Behind these complexes would be a wooden fence that would leave little spaces for gardening. And both these spaces would lead up to the spacing ground/parking lot where there would be a tree and the light pole. Then from there, if you look both ways into the spaces created by the building and the fences, it would just be darkness because the building's colossal over the lights. And there, under the tree we sat. As a common, warm summer night, my buddies and I stood out late playing cards, chilling with only the thought of tomorrow's plan. As always in every group of friends, there's always that one friend who would say stupid things without thinking. As the night grew old, probably about almost 1 a.m., one of my buddies spoke out saying, "Is it just me or tonight pretty cold?" But it was pretty common to have cold breeze blowing during this time of the night. And we all nodded our heads in agreement. Then that one friend spoke out of nowhere saying, "Or something is just here with us," followed with laughter, but everyone started bitching at him. Now he had planted that into our minds. As we carry on playing cards, that one friend said he was getting bored and for us to tell ghost stories. We all careless and said we haven't experienced anything to tell anyways. Plus, we all said that that was a girl thing, lol. Anyways, that one friend suddenly responded, "Really? Nothing has ever happened to you guys? What if a body suddenly fell from the tree?" Then we all kind of freaked out with that picture in mind and yelled at him. Although it all followed with laughter, but of course, deep down, that would be very creepy. As minutes went by, that one friend suddenly yelled, "Oh shit, look above." We all stood up, panicking, and looked up with nothing. Bitch scared us, but again we ended it with laughter and scolded him. As time passed by, it was around 2 or 3 when we decided to stop and go home. As we parted ways, away from the tree, a loud thump fell behind us. We looked spooked and panicked to my door, looked back at the table under the tree, and there we saw a large body of clothes, although we were not sure if it's a body, but we're sure that the noise is too loud and heavy to just be clothes, and we saw some hair float in the breeze. Even at those quick seconds, it felt like it was ready to get up and run after us, ready to snatch one of us. We got so scared everybody ran into my apt. Unfortunately, my parents weren't home too, just my younger sis and my 2 older brothers. But after that night, we never again stayed at the same spot, and we cut down that tree. But something odd and freaky was that the next morning following that night, a black jacket remained on the table which was unrecognizable by any of our friends and the apartments. Story 14. 5 years ago when I was 20, I almost died in an accident. My family went camping at Yosemite. We camped next to a small lake with a small waterfall. Throughout the day and night, we would hear the waterfall. Around 6 p.m., we took turns jumping off the rocks into the lake. There were 10 of us swimming that day, including me. When it was my 3rd time, something happened. I jumped into the water feet first. Right when my head went underwater, I felt someone grab my leg and pull me down. I couldn't fight off whatever was pulling me down. I was so mad because I thought it was one of my cousins. I kicked and kicked until I felt like I kicked that person in the face. I reached the surface gasping for air. I immediately looked around and asked, "Who's in the water with me?" All 9 of my family members were standing on the rock waiting for their turns to jump. My cousin too asked, "What?" "Ha ha ha, you look like you were drowning, dude. Don't make excuses if you don't know how to swim." I was wearing an ankle bracelet that my boyfriend got for me. When I came out of the water, it was gone. I was so sad. Everyone laughed at me, but I knew what I felt. It was a hand that pulled me down. I told them I didn't want to swim anymore and left them. I told them not to swim anymore as well. Of course, no one listened to me. After drying off, I sat with my aunts preparing for dinner. 10 minutes later, all of the kids who were swimming came running. Some tripped and kept crawling when they couldn't get back up. The older men were outraged because the kids were screaming loudly and tripped over the pot of rice. 2, the kid who was making fun of me looked at me dead in the face. "My, how did you get here before us?" All of my aunts and uncles were like, "She got here like 15 minutes ago." He said, "No, she was just across the lake." It was a small lake, possibly 15 feet across. Mai was across the lake just smiling at us. We threw rocks at her because she just stood there and smiled, like just right now. We ran because Mai started laughing like a crazy pleased person. My aunts and uncle looked at me. I was scared. My uncle took me to the side, and I told him about the incident where someone tried to pull me under, but when I got out of the water, everyone was outside of the water. He whispered to me, "Mai, just admit that it was you for now. It's too scary for everyone, and it's too dark to drive home right now. We haven't eaten yet too. I'll make everyone go home tomorrow." I had to admit to all of my cousins that it was me. I found a shortcut, and I ran as fast as I could before they could get there. My uncle was so irritated at us that night. Instead of leg dab the proper way, he just took some food and yelled out, "Liege twg noj sis noj some noj. Whoever wants to eat, come eat. Whoever doesn't want to eat, don't eat." And threw the food on the ground. That night, I slept in a 10-person text. All of our cousins are close. Boys and girls between the ages of 10-25, we all slept in the same tent. We didn't talk about that occurrence at all. Instead, we reminisced about the younger days and made fun of the younger kids for their boring childhoods. Then we were a popping noise and hiss. It was hard to hear because of the waterfall sounds, but we all came out of our tents. My parents flashed their flashlights around. My uncle yelled at them to stop flashing it in the random forest. My uncle asked where the pop come from. We pointed in the direction of our cars. He flashed his light at the tires. All 4 cars, all 16 tires were slashed. We only heard 1 pop and 1 hiss. He said told all the younger kids to go back into the tent. All of the adults went to look at the tires. Clean cuts, mostly looking like a stab in each tire. My uncle was ready to punish the kid who did this, but we told him, everyone was in the tent. No one left. A healthy-looking tree right next to my uncle fell down and almost hit him. Then the next one after that fell. Then the next, almost to 10 trees. I was scared shitless. I ran back into our tent, and I was like F this shit. I remembered hearing everyone arguing for a while and then silence. It got too quiet. At this point all the younger kids fell asleep, but I couldn't. I heard my uncle yell, "Mai, why are you out there so far alone? Hurry up and go back in your tent." My cousin too and I looked at each other from the opposite sides of the tent. We opened the zipper, and both popped out heads out. 2 said, "Mai is right here." That's when I saw her. She looked exactly like me. She looked at me dead in the eyes and smiled, smiling from ear to ear so hard. She started walking towards everyone. I looked at her hands, and she was holding my ankle bracelet. My uncle suddenly started yelling at it. Koj yag nij los yag dab. Kav tsij kayav mused sam kuv mwab koj tu a naj. Nyag ensej mwag kayas nig. Are you human or monster? Hurry and leave before I kill you. You nasty thing. Two and I zipped the tent, and I went to lay next to him. I curled my knees all the way up to my chest. Two slept by the end and I was second to the end. I laid next to Two because I was supposed to sleep on the other end, but nope. Needless to say, we stayed up the whole night. Our phones had no signal, so we couldn't even call for help. Fortunately, rangers came to see if we had a permit for our fire, and we asked for their help. They were able to take my uncles to go buy tires and change our tires. We packed the shit out of there. One of the rangers came up to me and said, "Hey, here's the bracelet you were looking for." I was like, do I know you? He said, we met last night. At the camp 2 miles from here. I was like, no. I was here at all times. He said they didn't make it to our camp to check for permits the night before because one of their tires popped. When he handed me the bracelet, it was my bracelet. The one the creepy look-alike ghost was holding when she pulled me underwater. I was so scared I told him to throw it away as far as he could. When we got home, we had Ua Nij and who plagued for everyone, especially me. I looked like a crazy-ass person after my family was done with me, with black strings around my neck, red strings around my hands and legs, even a black string around my waist. I was not supposed to take it off for a year. 5 years went by. No one had told us the reason to as why we saw a ghost that looked like me. I am writing this now because last night I had a dream about that ghost. In my dream, I was doing my makeup, looking in the mirror, and getting ready to go out. I moved my hand to comb my hair, but my reflection didn't move. I tried it again, and it still didn't move. Then my reflection started to smile by itself, the same creepy smile I saw 5 years ago. I was shocked. Even in my dreams I could control myself. I cussed at her, yelled at her, prayed to God, and I randomly started chanting Buddhist chants that I had never learned and only heard of briefly. Then my reflection started to be me again. Next was like a movie, like a montage. I was laying in a casket while all of this was being said to me in Hmong. I came to you because of what he did to me 3 lifetimes ago. We were destined to be each other's spouse for 5 lifetimes. The first lifetime, he cheated on me. The second lifetime, he died of cancer. The third lifetime, I died during childbirth during the war. Please go see my great-grandchild at. I came to you because I was not reborn this lifetime, and you took my face. I woke up, in my bed in the same position I was in my dream in the casket. I cried. My parents didn't know, but I drove to the house and parked outside of it. I thought about going in to knock, but I was like, how would I even know who the child is? Why would I even care to go look? The grandchild came out of the house, and how did I know that was the one? Damn boy looked exactly like my boyfriend at the time of the incident. How did I know it wasn't my ex? Because my ex married a Mexican lady, and they moved to Florida. I'm scarred for life. Story 15, The Dream House. A few years ago, my husband and I decided it was time to find a home for our growing family of 6. It was getting too crowded to live with my in-laws in our 1-bedroom day in and day out with all our things, so our search for the perfect home began. We visited countless homes in our area over a period of 6 months, with so many homes that were so close to being perfect, but not a single one that had everything we needed. One day, my husband found one that was way out farther from town than I wanted. It would be a 30-minute drive to come back into town for groceries and work. Plus the drive would include lots of wooded areas and I just wasn't comfortable knowing that I would be driving with the kids most of the time. When I pulled up to the house, I was speechless. The home was beautiful. It was an older ranch-style home in an older, established, and quiet neighborhood. The home was set back on a hill. There was a small wooded area in the front yard and backyard, along with tons of front yard space for the kids to run and play. The home had a full basement and garage that would be perfect for parties and all of my husband's things. As we walked through the home, we immediately noticed the home had wood floors throughout the whole house. Custom wooden cabinets were built in the living room and kitchen. There was even a large sunroom which would be a great area for entertaining guests or for all my plants. All the bedrooms and closets were spacious and I thought would be perfect for our growing family. The full basement had a workshop area, garage, bathroom, and plenty of shelves for storage. There was so much potential. We walked through the living room one last time before leaving, but something caught my eye. I noticed a large dent in the floor that looked like a soft scratch that led from the master bedroom on one side and led all the way out the door. My heart fluttered for a split second with an eerie thought and I asked our realtor, "What do you suppose would have caused that scratch?" He said, "Oh, that's nothing, you can't buff out when you redo the floors." But my mind instantly thought of a gurney going from the master room to the door. I brushed off that thought right away and we left the home. As we drove down the long, perfect driveway, we excitedly whispered to each other, "This is the one. It's perfect." We loved everything about the house. We talked about all the things we could do there. We called our realtor right away as we were driving home and put in an offer on our new little dream home, excited that we finally found it. I eventually fell asleep, too excited about the new house. That night, I had a dream. We had moved into the new house and my kids were running around playing in the front yard. I was raking leaves and watching my kids when a car pulled up. It was an older four-door car, like an Oldsmobile, with an older white lady driving. She drove up the driveway and rolled down the window. I called out hello and asked if she needed help. She tells me loudly, "This is my house. You need to leave." I told her, "I'm sorry, we just bought the house." She yelled loudly this time, "This is my house. You need to leave." I woke up immediately from the dream and I was terrified. I woke up my husband to tell him all the details. He told me not to worry and to go to the local courthouse in the morning to see if anyone died in the home. The next day, I drove all the way to that county courthouse and asked for the death records of anyone who may have lived in the home. The lady kindly helps me and leaves me at the computer to read through the documents. There were 4 previous homeowners. I was so relieved as I read through each one, seeing that they all died either in the hospital or nursing home. I was starting to feel a little silly that my mind was simply scaring me, knowing I was such a big scaredy cat. As I get to the last homeowner and I scroll through the information, I see it. My heart sunk as I read. Her birthday said she was Caucasian, in her 90s, and she died of unknown causes. She had died in her home. That house. My dream house. I was shaking as I closed out of the computer. I was shaking as I thanked the lady for letting me read through the home records. I was shaking as I walked to my car to call my husband to share what I read. As I drove home, I cried and called my mom because I was so scared that this happened to me. It made me feel plig to have experienced this. Of course, I called our realtor right away and retracted our offer. We did continue the search for our dream home and found it months later, so we did find our happily ever after and continue living and loving our real dream home. But this dream, this is the one and only dream that I have remembered in detail to this day, and it's been almost 10 years. Many dreams every night are just whatever dreams, but dreams like these are real. This dream spoke to me. This dream was not coincidental. I often wonder what would have happened if I just ignored the dream and were just moved in. Who knows what could have happened? Story 16, My Pet. All original names are replaced for substitutions. This is a story about one of my friend. After her encounter, she never wanted a pet anymore. This is why. Narrative story. It was summer 2010 when I moved to my first apartment. I was 26 years old and confident on my ongoing life. I am a front desk supervisor for one of the biggest hotel in Minneapolis. So yes, I was alone but not lonely at that time. Before moving in, I had a Yorkshire Terrier dog named Lex. He was my best friend since I was 18. And yes, he was living with me. I was working second shift, so during the night when I came home from work, I would take him to the potty outside. Then I would play with him inside the apartment until we are both hungry and sleepy. Lex is very smart. Whenever he needs to go potty, he either barked or licked my hands or face if I am sleeping. 2 weeks after the new location, I started to notice something strange about my routine. It seems a lot slower than normal. I thought maybe it's just Lex. Then I realized that Lex is acting weird. He's usually so energetic when I came home. But for some reason, he looks so weak and exhausted. I thought he was sick, so I took him to see a veterinarian the next morning before work. It was 8 a.m. when I got to the vet. They did some kind of physical exam on my dog, and for some reason, they wanted Lex to stay, due to a high blood pressure. So I left him there for one more day. As I came back from work knowing Lex won't be home, I decided to get on Facebook and chat with old friends. I went to the living room to use the computer and had only the kitchen light on. After 1 hour of chatting, I saw on my screen a reflection of a big shadow that went across the kitchen. I looked over but didn't see anything, so I thought it was my imagination or because I was on the computer for too long. The next morning I went to go pick up Lex. The veterinarian said that he needs to rest and he should be fine. I was happy and relief. Again I came from work, took Lex to go potty, then continued with my night. Later that night I woke up 2 a.m. because Lex needed to go potty again. As I opened the door, Lex just lay on his little dog bed while staring at me. He didn't want to move. So I was like, come on Lex. Alright then. Don't wake me up for no reason, so I went off to sleep again. An hour later I woke up again. I turned on the light and asked Lex again. He was laying on his bed still. He just stared at me, but this time he had tears coming out his left eye. I was like, oh, you just miss me, huh? You will feel better soon, okay? So then I was off to sleep. This time I had a dream of Lex. He was talking to me in Hmong. He said, those 2 times you woke up, I didn't lick you. It was the boy. Why didn't you save me? I woke up petrified. I felt a cold breeze through my spines. My heart starts pounding at 100 mph. I turned on most of the lights and looked at Lex. He was dead. Suddenly, I called my parents. They had my cousin's grandpa, a shaman, over. It was 9 a.m. when he got to my place and I didn't sleep at all when it all happened. After he did his magic calls, he told my parents and me that, the boy who died here took your dog's spirit. The boy was riding your dog and was using his hands to cover your dog's mouth. He licked your hands to see if you love your dog more than him, but your 2 chances were over. The boy said that he won't bother you no more, now that he got a friend. After hearing that, I felt cold, scattered goosebumps all over my body. 3 days later, I changed apartment rooms and moved somewhere else after my lease was over. I felt so bad that I couldn't save Lex's life. I never want to go through that again. R.I.P. Lex. Story 17, Dad's Frightening Encounter. This event happened to my dad and to one of my grandmas. Before the Hmong partook in the Vietnam War, my grandma would often sleep at the farm, watching over the cattle and taming the garden. The farm was separated from the village by the highlands, thus, traveling in between often took a considerable amount of time. Due to the terrain, my grandma would often stay at the farm for 3 to 4 days before heading back to the village. One day in particular, my dad, who was 10 or 11 at the time, was sent off to accompany my grandma. When my dad arrived, he helped my grandma with the farm's work. Although the day went by normal, it soon changed as night approached. As the sun set in the horizon, Grandma quickly told my dad to get inside. My dad, who liked to stay out late, insisted that he stayed out longer, but Grandma refused and scolded him to get inside. Dad did what he was told. Grandma quickly prepared dinner, and afterward went to sleep. With the presence of the sunlight still sneaking through the cracks of the wooden house, my dad was unable to fall asleep. His eyes opened widely, staring into the ceiling as he laid next to my grandma in frustration. Eventually, my dad did fall asleep, but his sleep was short-lived. The sounds of footsteps alluring from the rooftop woke him up. My dad turned to my grandma, who was also awake at the time. Grandma told my dad to shoo, just as he was about to ask what it was. Grandma told Dad to pretend as though he was asleep. The stepping from above grew louder and more vicious. It soon was followed by a monkey-like screech, which terrified my dad. My dad was really scared at this time. He hurled his blanket over his face. Moments later, the sound stopped. My dad, scared but yet curious, asked my grandma what it was, and my grandma responded that it may have been a monkey, or better saying, a pim nuj vai, a monster monkey. Grandma and Dad both made it through the night. Morning arrived, and Dad insisted that they both head back home. My grandma, however, replied that she cannot grant my dad's request due to the long journey back to the village. Grandma also said that she still had to watch over the farm. Being a frightened kid, my dad asked my grandma multiple times throughout the day, even cried one time as he shared. My grandma eventually gave in after the discovery of the death of multiple chickens. The presence of blood and plucked feature indicated that they were preyed on. Grandma responded to my frightened dad that they would head back tomorrow because she still had some things to take care of and that they won't be able to make it to the village before nightfall. The day went by quickly. Soon, dusk approached and Grandma, again, told my dad to come inside before the sun sets. This time, my dad quickly obeyed and hurried inside. Before he did, Grandma noticed something over the horizon and pulled my dad's attention toward it. Dad looked and to his surprise saw a person-like figure. Dad turned to Grandma and asked who the person was. Grandma stumbled, and in an instant chill, whispered that what was approaching them was not a human, but rather, perhaps the creature that troubled them yesterday. Goosebumps rushed through my dad's body as he panicked. At a closer glance, the creature was indeed not a person, but what appeared to be an ape-like creature, walking up straight like a human, but yet in a humpback posture. The creature hurried down, straight toward the farm site. Instead of sleeping in the small hut for the night, Grandma made a hasty decision. She built a small fire, boiled leftover in a pot, grabbed what she can, locked the doors, and headed straight to the cattle's pen. The cows had a mini shelter where they slept. Grandma quickly hurried herself and my dad in and buried the entrance with dried banana leaves. Grandma told my dad to stay very put and quiet. For extra insurance, Grandma held tightly to the wheat scythe she brought with her. The creature that lurked them made its presence as it circled the farmhouse. Grandma glimpsed and noticed how hairy and dark-looking the creature was. The creature stormed the outer layer of the house, not for a brief moment this time, but nearly for 10 or so minutes. After much satisfaction, the creature left as quickly as it came. Momentarily later, Grandma could hear distressed calls from the chicken in the chicken pen. Too frightened to conduct any action, Grandma waited out the scene. Morning finally arrived, and the two packed up what they needed, and hurried home. Story 18, always lock the bathroom door at funeral homes. This happened at a little funeral home in St. Paul. It was a Christian funeral service, and everyone was gathered and sitting down listening to the pastor. I decided to use the bathroom since I knew no one would be in the main bathroom, which is close to where everyone was gathered. If I waited until everyone was mingling, then I would have to wait in line or use the one downstairs, which is already creepy enough. Once I got in the bathroom, I thought to myself, everyone is sitting down over there, and no one is going to come use the bathroom. I'm sure they all saw and heard me get up, so I'm not going to lock the door. Plus I'm just going to pee really quickly. Another side of me said I should lock it, but I just shrugged it off. As soon as I finished peeing, the door freaking opens. It was another pastor who was also there at the service. He said sorry really quickly and closed the door. Immediately after that, I swear the vibes felt funny. I literally felt like I was being laughed at by a group of something. I was so embarrassed because 1, I'm a girl, 2, he's a senior pastor, and we go to the same church. 3, locking a door takes less than a second, and I'm stupid AF. Story 19, The Mysterious Cats. This happened in Minnesota around Geranium Avenue streets if you're around there. But this also happened like 8 years ago, so if you live in Geranium Avenue now, don't worry about it. Anyway, the mysterious cats, and I mean a lot of them. One stormy day in Minnesota, at one point there was a storm so bad that it knocked out my house electricity. Since the storm was ongoing that entire day, the city wouldn't check it out until the next day when the storm subsides. So without electricity, we had to resort to using candles to lit up the whole house. It was super dark and super eerie and spooky looking all over the place. Although it feels homey, that night turned into a spooky experience. The sun has set and it is now dark. All of a sudden around 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., we started hearing cats meowing near the windows. Including the bathroom window, kitchen window, living room window, and even bedroom windows. We thought to ourselves, maybe they were all just looking to be sheltered because of the storm. Mind you, that it was still raining, but not storming. We just assumed that they didn't want to get wet. It wasn't until midnight hits and around 1-2 am, the cats were still meowing for whatever reason and everyone could hear it. Everyone in the family got spooked, so we all moved into the living room and stayed quiet and trying to sleep. We didn't sleep until around 4-5 am trying to figure out why a lot of cats were surrounding our house. Some say that cats are attracted to candle lights. Some people say that cats are protecting our house from something and scaring something away. Our speculation says that they are waiting for one of us to offer them our soul so they can leave us alone. Due to Hmong superstitions, there were so many speculations, and to this day, and we will never know why. Morale of the story, candle lights attracts cats. So don't put candle lit next to windows if your house electricity ever goes out. Story 20. This is a story of my friend, Fui. He had quite a few paranormal experiences when he was young, but I'll only talk about this particular incident. This took place over 20 years ago. When Fui was in high school, he took a parenting class as an elective. In that class, there was a baby doll that each student was assigned throughout the semester to take care of as if it was their own child. Everything was going fine until one night, the baby started crying every once in a while. It got to the point that the crying became annoying to everyone in the household, so Fui took out the batteries. However, even with the batteries out, the baby kept on doing the same thing. They all freaked out and tossed the baby into the basement and closed the door going downstairs. It still kept on crying from time to time. After a couple of hours or so, one of the family members decided to go see what's going with the baby doll. This part might seem a little confusing, but just to clarify, there is a door in the basement that leads out to the backyard. When they opened the basement door, they heard the door downstairs leading outside opened and closed. As soon as that door closed, the baby automatically stopped crying. I'm not exactly sure what happened after that, but this was just one of quite a few experiences that Fui had while in that house. Story 21. There once was this guy who had moved into a building which had a view out into the other buildings next to it. In the other building, there was this beautiful woman who he had always seen. She was so beautiful and she loved to dance because he would watch her as she danced around in her room. For a long time he had admired her from afar in his apartment, and one day while he was watching her she was dancing all day non-stop. He finally got the courage to go over to her apartment and introduce himself to her. He finally got to the other building up to her door when he knocked and the door opened. He walked over to where he always saw her dancing. What he saw when he got to the room was that she had hung herself in the room. He thought he had saw her dancing the whole day, but actually, she had hung herself and was swinging back and forth the whole day. He had been staring at her swinging corpse and thought she was dancing. Story 22, A Guardian Angel or a Pojn Sug. This happened a few years back. I believe it was in 2010. I was around 17 years old, and I ran away from home. I was a troubled kid. Around this time, I had been away from home for quite some time, maybe 2 years at the most. It was late around 11 p.m., and I was coming from a guy friend's place. He lives in a little house in the back of his parents' place. At that time, there was this girl that lived with him there. This girl just got dropped off by her boyfriend, and I thought it was kind of awkward being there, so I decided that it was time to leave. As I was walking down the neighborhood that he lived in trying to get to the big street, I kept looking back. I usually do this because I am a female walking late at night. I usually look out for anything or anyone unusual. Right about now, I am a few houses down from this guy's house. As I kept looking back, I noticed this cat that came out behind from a tree following me. This cat was all black, but his face was white. As Hmong people, we all know that sometimes cats aren't really cats. Sometimes they are Pojn Sug. I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong, but you guys know what I mean. When I walked, I noticed this cat would walk behind me, maybe a house down away from me. It will not come near me. At this time I was already spooked at the thought of knowing that sometimes cats are not really cats, so I stopped and noticed that the cat stopped too. When I started to walk, he would follow me and start walking too. When I got even more spooked, I started to run, and this thing ran after me. I decided to walk towards it to scare it away, so I stopped and walked towards it, and this time, this thing ran into this house with black fence. I thought to myself that maybe the cat took off, so I started walking normally again. When I looked back, there was the cat Aegean. I was so scared. At this time, I was almost at the big street, but luckily, the guy who dropped off his girlfriend drove by and saw me. He asked if I wanted a ride, and I took his offer because I was too spooked. Like I said earlier, I took off from home 2 years ago. My parents had moved from their old house, and I had no idea where they moved to during this time. One night, a few weeks after this cat incident, when I was at this house where everyone used to come and kick it at, it was my luck, and it got raided. The cops got my name and took me to this house where my parents moved to make sure I was their child. I noticed that this house was on the same block as my guy friends. What spooked me even more was that this was that same house that the cat ran into. This story may not sound as scary as others, but I wanted to share it because during this time, my grandpa had just passed away. He was a great shaman and was very known for his work. I believe that that cat who was following me could have been my grandpa, looking after me and trying to tell me to go home. Or maybe, I was just tripping the heck out by a cat who just knew how to mess with people late at night. Whatever your belief is, there are such things as guardian angels and Pojn Sug. You just never know when you will run into one. Story 23. Generally this kind of stuff doesn't happen to me. I swear it was straight out of a movie. I've included a picture I drew of my experience. I believe that if you show fear, it will keep coming back to scare you. I'm not a very good artist, as you can see, but you get the point. Call it sleep paralysis or whatever you want, but this is what happened to me. Prior to this experience, a relative had just passed away a week ago. She was old and sick. It was during the week of the funeral when this happened to me. It was my day off. I had gotten my errands done and I was feeling tired. I decided to take a nap on the futon in the living room during the day. As I was dozing off, I started to hear bare feet shuffling on the laminate floor. It surprised me because no one was home besides me. The sound of multiple feet shuffling got louder and louder. All of a sudden, a figure appeared on the other side of the coffee table. The figure had long, black hair and was wearing a mung dress, the ones where they wrapped it around their top. Hunched over with her long hair in her face, she started slowly walking on the other side of the coffee table towards my feet. As scared as I was and as hard as I tried to move, I couldn't. I felt like I was paralyzed. She continued to move around the coffee table. When she reached the corner of the coffee table by my feet, she flew towards my face. At that very moment, I flinched and closed my eyes. The second I opened my eyes, she was gone. Story 24, The Knocks. Before I start, I want to describe the house I used to live to avoid any confusion. It was a big one-floor house with 4 rooms, a large living room, a sizable kitchen, and a large blue porch in the back. My room was next to the door leading to the porch. The house was built around in the 50s and apparently there were a lot of unfortunate events taking place there. However, I don't know the backstories to all of them. Anyways, this happened when I was 14. I was home alone. My whole family went to my grandparents' place while I wanted to stay home because I'm waiting for my boyfriend, ex now, to call. It was during the time when we were still relying on home phone. My mom specifically told me to not invite him over and to clean the living room before she left. So as I was in the middle of cleaning, my boyfriend called and we talked about our day. It was around 7 but it was still bright because it was during midsummer. Then I heard the screen door outside open, followed by a knock. The door have a window so you can see who's outside of it. However, when I look, there was no one but the screen door was open and the wind kept slamming it back and forth. Thought my family came home early and one of my sibling was playing a prank on me. I opened the door check but there was no one out there. I was creep out but I tried not to let it get to me. I simply closed the screen door and went back inside. Suddenly the house felt off. The temperature suddenly dropped to a freezing degree and I could feel I wasn't alone inside the house. I told my boyfriend what happened. He wanted to come over since he lived only a few blocks away. However, I told him not to because I didn't want to get scolded by my mom. She is a pretty strict Hmong woman. So I ignored the feeling and went to turn off the AC before continuing doing my chores while talking to my boyfriend. Soon the sunlight became dimmer. Then another knock on the door but this time it sounded loud and more urgent. I stopped talking on the phone and looked toward the door. There was no one there but the screen door was open again. I didn't want to open the door since it is darker outside now. I just dropped the broom and ran into my room and locked it. Then I told my boyfriend to come over. He could tell I was scared so he told me he will knock the window so I would know it was him. He didn't want to hang up but he have to. I turned on my computer and turned the music up. Throughout the 10 minutes my boyfriend took to get to my house, the knocking became louder and louder. Then the knock on the window sent me jumping. I looked out and seeing my boyfriend was so relieved. I went to open the door and we stayed in the living room until my family came home. Of course, my mom was furious at me when she saw him but after I explained to her what happened, she calmed down. She had worse paranormal experiences with the house than I have. Although, she was still not happy. My dad sent my boyfriend home since it was dark and he was only 15. Anyways, it was after a few years that one of my cousin who lived there before my family moved and explained to me of what she know. Apparently, in the late 70s, an old woman died in my room closet. There was a robbery and one of the men hit her on the head before locking her in the closet. The old lady didn't died right then, but she didn't have relatives lived nearby to check on her and died due to a concussion. So I found the reason why the knocks were louder in my room. Satri 25, Unforgiven. Here is a short story that I heard. There was a guy and a girl who were dating. Unfortunately, the boyfriend's dad did not like the girl, so he forbids his son from dating the girl. However, the boyfriend ignores his dad's wishes and he continues to date the girl. The dad orchestrated a plan to have another guy kidnap the girlfriend and marry the girlfriend. Thus, this other guy kidnaps the girlfriend to his home, then marries her. The boyfriend discovered what his dad did, so he became very upset, but there was nothing that he can do since his girlfriend is already married. He left the village and went to a place by himself, where he took poison and died. When the village and his dad found his body, he had already started to decay. The dad was so heartbroken that he cried out in anguish. He picked up his son, then lovingly cradled his son's corpse in his arms as he called out for his son, "Cub tuss me tub, kuv tuss me tub." All of a sudden, the son's corpse spat out some rotten liquid/saliva onto the dad's face. This shocked the dad, so the dad immediately threw the son's corpse back onto the ground. The dad then stopped crying for his dead son. Story 26. Back in 2016, I went with my mom to Laos to visit family. The third day there, my uncles, my mom's brothers, did a jingle bell for my mom and me. The jingle bell took place at one of my uncle's house. It lasted until night time around 7:30 p.m. My mom left after the jingle bell was over back to one of my uncle's house to rest. I ended up staying with my cousins and their friends to drink and hang out. As 10 p.m. came around, I was getting tired, so I told my guy cousin that I would be heading back to his house. I told him I would walk back by myself. The walk back to his house wasn't too far, and the path I will be walking on would take me straight back to his house. With no hesitation, he immediately told me he would take me back on his motorbike. I had never rode on a motorbike before, so I was scared. I told him no, that it was okay. I would just walk back, and he could stay with his friends. Seeing that I was really going, he got up from his seat and dragged me to his motorbike. Of course I couldn't do anything about it since he seriously didn't want me to walk back by myself, so I ended up holding my breath all the way back to his house on his motorbike. I was pretty scared, and it was the longest 90 seconds ride ever in my life. 2 days after my mom and I went to visit her first cousin, my mom and I ended up staying until dinner time at his house. After dinner his wife walked my mom and I back to my uncle's house. It was around 7:30 p.m., so the sun was setting, and it was beginning to get dark. We were walking on the same path that I was going to take 2 nights earlier back to my uncle's house. While walking, my mom's first cousin's wife told my mom and me about back in the day when they first moved into the village. Back then the village was new, and there wasn't a lot of people, and there were a lot of trees and forest areas. Homes were far apart and was about a 2 to 6 minute walk from each other. One night, a married couple came back late from the farm. The sun had already set, and it was dark. The husband was holding a flashlight while the wife was walking ahead of him. They walked on a path back to the village. When the couple was about to enter into the village at the end of the path, they saw a small child around 3 to 4 years old. At the end of the path there was a mango tree. The couple saw that the child was under the tree bending down and picking up mangoes that had fallen onto the grass. As the couple got closer, the husband shined the flashlight at the child and was about to tell the child to go home since it was dark, and it was no longer safe to be out and about. The child turned around, and the couple saw that it wasn't a human child, but a Pojnsug troll with very messy, long hair with weird-looking eyes with this weird-looking mouth. The Pojensug's troll's face was super disfigured. The couple screamed at the top of their lungs. The Pojensug troll got scared from their screams and dropped all the mangoes and ran back into the forest. The couple ran all the way home screaming and crying. Their screams scared all the villagers that lived close by. Some villagers were already asleep, and some were still eating dinner. Villagers gathered at the couple's house and asked what happened. The couple told everyone what they saw, and everyone got scared. It was the first time someone experienced something scary after moving into the village. Scared, the people who lived close to the edge of the village that night went to sleep with family members who lived a bit farther away. The next day a Huplig soul gathering ceremony was taken place for the couple. After she got done telling my mom and me, we got close to the corner where we would have to make a right turn to a bigger road toward my uncle's house. Then I noticed there was mango tree at the corner where we will be making the right turn. My mom's cousin's wife then said, Saj kev peb tog tam sim no yog saj kev ua ob niam siv tau tog hmon tod thiab sob to ua niab tod peb hov tej yog sob to sivn cows to ua ob niam siv tau pom tus poj and sug los cust sivn cows tarnach. The path we are walking on now is the same path that the married couple took that night, and that tree that is in front of us is the mango tree that the married couple saw the Pojensug troll come to pick up mangoes to eat. When the last word left her mouth, all the hairs on my body stood up immediately. I was sacred and asked her why she had to tell my mom and me that scary story while we were walking on the same path. When my mom and I got to my uncle's house, I immediately went to talk to my guy cousin. I told him now I understood why he didn't let me walk back by myself 2 nights ago. Then he said, yes, he heard that story when he was still young. He said even if it happened years ago, people in the village are still scared, so after that until the day I left, even when it was light out, I never walked alone on that path. Story 27, The Illegal Blood Oath. I saw an untitled story posted on the Hmong Ghost Stories forum by a gentleman and I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to share it. I changed and rearranged some words and sentences so that it would be easier to follow and understand the story. As Hmong, we know that a blood oath cannot be broken, so it's super hard to save the person once their dead lover comes back to take them to the other side. Here is the story. This is a true story that occurred when I was a boy back in the Sacramento North Side neighborhood. A lot of Hmong family lived there and still do. Being a very large Hmong community in the area, words passes out quickly, even to young and innocently troublesome kid like me. Back in the early 90s, a lady was coming home from a visit to a friend's house in Sacramento, California. When she reached the front step of her house, she fainted into a coma and was announced dead at the hospital a couple of hours later. She was married at the time with lots of grown-up kids, whom already have their own kids too, thus, she's a grandma. They said her husband cried like a baby for hours. After a terrible, long while he became pale white, shivering, and couldn't weep anymore. A miracle or not? The next morning in the hospital when the professional pulled her body out from the cooler that was kept in the basement below with the others for a dissection. She suddenly sat right up, took a deep breath in, and started screaming, "Help! Help me!" Everyone in that room ran for their lives. The doctor called her husband and within couples of minutes, all the relatives was at the hospital's waiting room. Waiting for their turn to see how she is doing. Okay, that's just the first part of the story. The second part is she became better and started walking, talking, being normal like before. She told her story. When she got to her front yard, she felt coldness all of a sudden, and started feeling lightheaded. Then, she tried to make it into her house so she could sit down and relax, but her body shut down on her, so she fell onto the ground. Moments later, she said she recalled it was like being locked up in a big dark closet. She couldn't see or feel anything, but she could hear people crying and calling her name over and over. Then she heard a familiar voice said in Hmong, "Come on. Hold my hand and come with me." She said she couldn't see anybody, but she reached her arms up anyways. Someone grabbed it and pulled her up from her body, which was lying down at the hospital's emergency room. Before she flew up past the ceiling, she saw her body and all the doctors trying to help her out. Then, she saw the hospital roof, the entire city, the world, the clouds, and then finally, heaven. Just like how they showed it in most movies. When she reached heaven's gate, she realized that the voice she heard, and the hand that grabbed hers, was her old ex-boyfriend from back in Laos. The door opened and they walked inside. It was like a giant courtroom, except everything was almost white all over. The case was that when she and her ex-boyfriend were young, he had tasted some of her bloods. So when he died, he had that in the records as proof to take her with him. She said she was so scared up there. She was crying and begging the judge to let her come back to watch her grandkids grow, and to at least let her have one last good conversation with her beloved husband. The favor was more towards her ex-boyfriend, but the table turned when a man with long brown hair and beard, long white cloths, old wooded like sandal, walked into the room and towards her direction. He reached his hands over to touch her face, and she saw a hole in the middle of his palm. She don't know who Jesus is, not yet, until after she told her story. That was her description of this gentleman. In Hmong language he spoke, "My daughter, you are a good person, and you are brought up here for the wrong reason at the wrong time." She said in that very moment, all her fear was gone. Faded away as if she already knew that it was going to be all right. "I know you didn't want to drink blood with him and you didn't taste it his. He forced himself to cut you with a baboon stick and lick your blood from his fingertip." She said right there and then, it seemed as if he was in charge of the whole heaven, because everybody in that courtroom that was yapping before is now silent. Then the man said, he is to be punished. To be locked up in heaven's prison for 100 years before being released to be reincarnated. Then he looked down, as if staring at his own feet, and said in a hurried tone, "I have to send you back now before it's too late." He grabbed her and threw her down back to earth from the sky above. She claimed to remember falling back down so fast and thinking she might hit the ground. So she was screaming for help. That's when she slammed into her body and snapped back into reality. Story 28. When I was little, I was in a pretty bad bike accident. I was hit by a car on the way home from school. The police was called, but the driver got away. This was at a time when people didn't have cell phones. I woke up in a hospital with a broken leg. They gave me a lot of pain medications. My family would come visit me time to check on me every day. I remembered seeing this little girl that would come visit me. Her name was... let's just say her name was Rachel. She was about my age at the time, 11. She was kind of cool but weird at times. She would ask questions, especially about my feet. Sometimes at night when I was sleeping, she would tell me to go with her to room 203. She wanted me to see her room and look at all the paintings she made. I would ask her to just bring it to me because I would need a wheelchair to move around. The nurses would definitely catch us. She dragged me out and pushed me toward her room. I looked through the glass window and would see a girl sleeping inside. I asked Rachel, "Someone is sleeping on your bed?" Disorientated voice, "No, that's me." The nurse caught me outside my room and asked why I was out. I told her my friend and I needed some fresh air. She said, "What friend?" I looked behind me and saw no one there. The nurse pushed me back to my room and told me to stay there. She thought I was lying until I mentioned the name Rachel. The name gave chills behind her back. She told me to stay in my room and that there was no Rachel, and if there was, then say no. She left me with a night light on just in case. As the nurse left, Rachel popped up again. I told her that I didn't want to play anymore. She eventually left. I saw a strange glow around her feet like chains. Around 2-3 a.m., I heard a noise in my room. I checked the room and called for a nurse. As I waited for the nurse, I started to hear chains rattle louder and louder. I saw a face smiling at me peeking through the window. I was terrified and got out of that room. Somehow I ended up near room 203. A little girl's voice was telling me to go inside. I tried to stop and leave, but someone or something was holding my chair. I looked at the reflection of the glass and saw a girl with rotten flesh behind me pushing me closer and closer to the room. Now I was in the room with someone in the bed. The room was painted all red and darker than usual. The sheets on the bed rose and all I saw was a shadow looking at me. It kept asking me to go with her. It came right next to me and started smelling my skin, touching my hair, and looking at my feet. It asked, "Can I have your feet?" It squeezed my legs. The pain felt as though someone was pushing a big piece of metal into my skin. Finally the nurse came into room 203 and grabbed me out of there. As we left, I saw that there really was someone in that room. After I recovered from my accident, I went back to the hospital to room 203. In that room I saw a little girl named Rachel in a coma. The nurse told me that she has been in there for a year. As I left, I started to feeling this weight on my feet like chains. A week later, she died, and now sometimes, she visits me and asks if she can have my feet. Story 29. The week of the Minnesota J4 tournament, my guys and I decided to go raving at the Breakaway Festival. We rented an Airbnb 10 minutes from Allianz Field. When we got there, one of my buddies said he felt weird but didn't tell us until the last day. Friday night, we all went to Breakaway except one of us. He decided to just come kick it and not buy tickets. The whole bottom floor was an open concept where the living room, kitchen, and dining room were connected. From that was a hallway to the back door, one bedroom, the stairs to the upper level, and one bathroom. This will be important later. He said he went upstairs and chilled in his room after we left and was just on his phone. Then out of nowhere he started hearing small footsteps running around downstairs like kids playing in doors/drawers opening. He said this was around 9 or 10. We didn't get home until 1 a.m. that night because we were buzzed ASF and spent 40 minutes looking for our car. Saturday morning, we all woke up, and most of us were ready to drink again. This time some of the guys said, "Let's go pre-game at the other guy's house," so I decided to take a shower before we went. I checked the upstairs bathroom, and the light was on and locked. I knocked and yelled, "Damn! Who blowing up the bathroom? I'm trying to shower." Since nobody answered, I thought one of my guys were hurt, and I went back to my room. I repeatedly checked 2 more times, and the light would be on and off different times I checked. I didn't want to shower in the downstairs bathroom, because it was always super cold in there no matter how hot the other rooms were. I wanted to keep drinking, so I started walking down the stairs to the other bathroom when the door suddenly opened, and I saw a quick shadow go by all the rooms. I said, "Damn stanky booty. You pooped for like 45 minutes, and walked back up." I checked all the rooms to see who it was, but nobody else was upstairs. I played it off by telling myself I was too buzzed and showered. Later that night, after all of us went back to Breakaway, the same guy stayed back but told us his brother in Zero Law who lived up there was going to come drink with him. The next morning we all got packed up and left to Hmong Village, where he said, "Bro, last night my brother-in-law saw a little girl peeking at us from the hallway with the cold bathroom. Then I looked up and saw the same little girl too, like an hour before you guys came back." Then I was like, damn, for real, and we started connecting dots of everything that happened. Be careful of where y'all choose to stay, because damn, 2 nights there, and we saw plenty shit for 2 nights. Story 30, Night Fishing, California. So, my cousin, Kerr, and I were fishing for catfish one night at one of the close-by rivers. The night started off a little bit weird. We started fishing at about 9 p.m. The place we were fishing was only accessible by animals from the sides of us. There was a creek behind us, and everything was basically the woods. We were talking about all kinds of things throughout the night, and then we started getting into discussing life and death. We were hearing weird noises that were out of the ordinary awkward noises you hear in the wilderness. They were like woman voices. We weren't getting any bites, so we decided that we would leave at 11 if we didn't catch anything. As 11 came closer, we weren't close to leaving, but still not a touch of the bait. At 11 all of a sudden I heard the loudest growl that shook me. I felt something on the right of me and jumped as high and as quick as I ever had before. I turned to my cousin, Kerr, who was sitting on my left, and saw a terrified look on his face. Not wanting to jump to conclusions, I asked him what was wrong. He said, "Did you hear that?" I asked him, "What did you hear?" He said, "That crazy growl, it shook my whole body." I looked at him and asked, "Are you sure?" He was sure, so I told him what I heard too. After it happened it was completely quiet, no rustling of the leaves, nothing, almost like everything just shut up. We drove around the pond a couple times to see what we might be able to find, but nothing. We decided whatever it was didn't want us there, so we went back. The next day I was telling my other cousin about it. This is where things gets even weirder. When we showed up to the spot we could hear the fish jumping. My cousin, Kerr, said we better catch something tonight, smiling and giggling. I got really excited and started to set up my gear, noticing I left the top piece of my rod inside the car. My cousin, Kerr, already had his line in the water. I said, "FCK, I left my other rod piece in the car, give me your keys." So as I was making my way up to the car I could hear Kerr yelling, "Hurry up, they're biting like crazy, but I can't hook them." Making my way back down I could see Kerr, but he was not alone. I stopped. I seen a little boy just smiling at me. He was playing with Kerr's fishing rod, bending the tip so it makes it look like a fish is biting. I told Kerr, "Come up here." As he was walking up I just ran to the car. He did not hesitate, he followed right behind me. We got in and took off, leaving everything there. He asked me what was wrong. I told him that those were not bites you were getting, it was a little boy playing with your fishing pole. Until this day I do not fish at night anymore. That incident scared me for life. Story 31, Do not wash the face. This is a story that my parents always tells when we would sit around the fire after a barbecue and tell stories. This story happened back in 1994. I'm pretty sure there is only truth to a certain extent, but it's still a creepy story. My family used to live in a house in Sacramento near Mark Hopkins Park. After living in the house for a few years, they moved to a new house, and in the old house, some of our relatives decided to move into the house. They had a son by the name of Nsog, who used to be in a gang, but since he was much older, he got out of the gang and found himself a job and turned his life around. No one saw what happened, but one day, Nsog, was gunned down in front of his house. His family was inside the house, and when they heard the gunshots, they came out to look, and Nsog, was already bleeding everywhere. His older sister was the first to run out right after the gunshots, and she caught him as he fell backwards, and instantly, he died in her arms. When the paramedics arrived, he was already dead on the scene. Nsog's, parents were very angry and sad that people had killed their son, and they automatically knew that it was gang-related. Since the police didn't have much evidence and any leads in the case, they couldn't do much but just wait. The days following his death to his funeral, Nsog's, father, being a shaman, burned a lot of paper money and incense, asking the gods and spirit to help catch the people who killed his son and to have what happened to his son happen to them also. On the day of his funeral, in Hmong tradition, when a person dies, before you send them off, you're supposed to wash their face with a piece of cloth and water to get rid of their memories in life so that they won't come back after the funeral. Also in the morning, you're supposed to serve them breakfast with rice and an egg that is broken in half. Well, in Hmong tradition, breaking the egg in half symbolizes the severing of the relationship between humans and spirits. His family, in a state of grief, especially his father, did not allow them to wash Nsog's, face or break the egg in half, hoping that his son will remember everything and the people who killed him. 3 days later, they finally buried Nksog's Gur, and that's when everything happened. In Hmong tradition, after you bury a dead person, you are supposed to perform a ritual by tying strings around your yard to stop the spirit from coming back into the house. Even though they performed the ritual that evening following Nksog Gur's burial, he returned to the house. When Nksog Gur was alive, he used to drive a big van that he would use for work and taking his siblings to school. The first night when he returned, his family said that his van mysteriously turned on, and it sounded like someone was revving the engine of the van. It would go on for a few minutes, then the car would turn off, and this happened the whole night. The next morning they woke up, and all 4 tires of the van was flat like someone had let out all the air of the tire. The second night, Nksog Gur returned again. This time, he was in the house. At night when the whole family was already asleep, Nksog's Gur mother said it sounded like someone was in the kitchen cooking and turning on the stove. When Nksog Gur was alive, he often worked night shift at his job and would come home late and cook for himself. Their stove was a gas stove, so it had the ignition that would make the tick 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 sound to light the fire. The mother worried that the house might burn down and went out to the kitchen and saw that the flame of the stove would go up and then die. And then the stove would turn on again. Being scared, she told Nksog to stop cooking and go to sleep like he was still alive, and then it finally stopped. On the third night, Nksog Gur returned to the house again. This night for some reason, the house was really cold. It was about 9 p.m. when the family started hearing a noise outside. The mother said it sounded like someone was weeping. For you Hmong people it sounded like how they would weep at a funeral, and the weeping was all around the outside of the house. It would start from one corner of their backyard and go to the other and around their house to the front yard and back around again. It was a faint weeping sound, just loud enough so you can hear it, but not loud enough to make out what it was saying or where it was coming from. The family, already scared, decided to all go to sleep early that night. That night, Nksog came back inside the house. First, it started with the stoves again. They would hear the ticking sound that came from the stove, and then all of a sudden you would hear pots and pans banging against each other. The thing that really got everyone scared was that night when Nksog Gur returned, he was looking for everyone in his family. He started calling out everyone's name who lived in the house, and everyone knew it was Nksog Gur's voice, but no one wanted to answer. They all just slept silently in their rooms and locked their doors, and Nksog Gur would come and try to open their door the whole night. The next morning, Nksog Gur's family, too scared of what had been happening the past few nights, decided to move. Nksog's Gur father said before they left the house that they are just going to store, and they never returned to the house. A few days later they came back and got their stuff and just told the same story. They even left the van that Nksog Gur was driving when he was alive behind at the house also. That's why at funerals, if you pay attention when they have the deceased person on the stretcher, and the guy known as the Tsiv Ta/Kwab Kev is chanting to the deceased person, at one point, he takes a cloth and washes the dead person's face and then breaks an egg in half. All of that is to avoid having the spirit of the dead return. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health, and remember to subscribe to the channel to reach 1,000 subscribers.